Time to load up some special issue bolt guns, and let's see what the Sternguard veterans can do for us. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we've been going through the Space Marine Codex unit by unit, and seeing how we can best use them on the battlefield. Now, I've always thought the Sternguard veteran squad are really quite a cool unit. When they first came out, it looked like they were one of Games Workshop's answers to how to make bolter-wielding Space Marines a credible threat on the battlefield. They may have lost the different types of ammunition that they can choose from, going from 7th to 8th, but these special issue bolt guns certainly pack a punch. In the background, as First Company veteran squads, the Sternguard have a lot more freedom to choose their different armament for the different missions they take up on the battlefield. A lot opt for bolt guns bearing special issue ammunition, and they are famed for scything down hordes of Xenos and Orcs with icy calm bolter fire. I found it interesting that in the background of the Space Marine Codex, they still talk about those Hellfire Shells, Kraken rounds and Vengeance rounds that all have unfortunately moved over to being Death Watch's thing. But I thought it was interesting that they still happen to be talked about in the background section of the Space Marine Codex. But now let's take a look at the unit's datasheet. So Sternguard veterans are bought in a unit of 5 Space Marines. You get a veteran sergeant and 4 Space Marine veterans. At base, they are armed with a special issue bolt gun, a bolt pistol, and frag grenades and crack grenades. And it's quite helpful that the sergeant isn't locked out of taking a ranged weapon. They cost 14 points per model each, so a base squad will cost you 70 points. So they're 2 points more than Tactical Marines, and for those 2 points you get an extra attack, an extra pip of leadership, and the special issue bolt gun, which is a regular bolt gun that has a 30-inch range and it's AP-2. So this means it's quite good for either sitting back in your own deployment zone, blazing away with bolter discipline at decent range, and it's quite good at shifting heavily armoured infantry and targets that are in cover due to that additional AP. I'd say that 2 points over a traditional Tactical Marine is a really solid upgrade for all the benefits that you get, and it certainly puts the squad's offensive output significantly higher. Now, every model in the squad has the option to trade out their special issue bolt gun, and they can swap it out for one of the weapons on the combi weapons list. Now, the combi weapons list includes the combi flamer, combi grav, combi melter and combi plasma, which range in cost from 8 points for the combi flamer up to 15 points for the combi melter. But they can also take the storm bolter, which will be 2 additional points over the special issue bolt gun, which is free, putting them at 16 points a model for a unit that's full of storm bolters. So these are some interesting options. I'd say that the combi weapons are best employed if you want an incredibly hard-hitting shooting unit that would come down out of a drop pod, because if you're putting in quite so much investment in heavy firepower like that, you want to guarantee that they're at least going to get 1 round's worth of firing off. The combi weapons can be tailored pretty much to whichever role you want to fill. I think that the strongest combi weapon tactic is probably to run a whole bunch of combi flamers as the Salamanders chapter, and max out their shots with their flamer stratagem. The other weapons are all pretty decent, but for me it's hard to justify their inclusion when you get the already very good special issue bolt gun for free. I do think that the storm bolters are an interesting option. I could potentially see a bunch of these guys jumping out of a drop pod full of storm bolters and deliver 40 strength 4 shots immediately to the enemy's face. But if I was going for a storm bolter veteran squad, I'd probably want to run multiple squads of the company veterans who can take the storm bolter and storm shield combo, as that makes them a nice durable unit as well as a decent damage dealer unit. My concern with the storm bolters on the Sternguard is that 16 points a model is quite a lot for a simple model in power armour, and they'll be absolutely prime targets for your opponent to just mow down as a priority target. Moving on, they can also take some special and heavy weapons, and they're quite flexible with this. 2 Space Marines in the squad, even if it's only a minimum 5-man squad, can trade out their special issue bolt gun for a heavy weapon, special weapon, or heavy flamer. So if you're tooling the squad up for a certain role, say you want a whole load of melter guns jumping out of a drop pod for example, you could think about throwing in a couple of dedicated melter guns to the unit. If you're sitting them back in cover with their special issue bolt guns blazing away from long range, you could think about adding a heavy weapon. Though if you are thinking about heavy weapons sitting at the back of the board that aren't troops, you might want to think about the Devastator squad because of that Sergeant Signum and the Armorium Cherub, both of which can combine to give you a really powerful first turn shooting from your heavy weapons. And finally, you can choose to take those heavy flamers. They could be an interesting addition to a Salamander's successor with additional range flamers, again bundling out for a drop pod or a transport for example. They'll certainly put a big dent in enemy infantry, particularly when combined with 8 combi flamers. The Sergeant is quite flexible. He can take 2 options from the Sergeant weapons list instead of the special issue bolt gun and the bolt pistol, or he can just choose one of them instead of the bolt pistol. I'd be quite tempted to keep the special issue bolt gun because it's free and also quite powerful. So you can give the Sergeant a fancy melee option, though weirdly Sternguard Sergeants are specifically locked out of being able to take the Thunder Hammer. Personally, I probably wouldn't bother with this myself. They're really a dedicated shooting unit and you should be trying to shoot with them rather than engage in close combat, but it wouldn't be the end of the world if you did throw on a cheap power fist, if you are thinking of deploying them close to the enemy via drop pod. But what I find more interesting is that it seems that you can take the special issue bolt gun and then also a combi weapon or a storm bolter, so unless I'm reading anything wrong, you could potentially have your Sergeant blazing away with a gun in each hand, firing off those special issue rounds and also blazing away with a storm bolter or combi flamer or something like that. As far as I can tell, I'm reading that right, so you can potentially give your Sergeant 6 shots if you give them a special issue bolt gun and a storm bolter, and that's not too bad for a 16-point model. Might be a bit of an oversight on Games Workshop's part. I wouldn't necessarily expect that little combo to survive a new Codex change whenever we get another one, but until then, it's a very cheap way to get more bolter shots in your army. The squad has the usual special rules. It has Angels of Death, so on the charge there will be 3 attacks. From Shock Assault, their special issue bolt guns will be AP-3 in the Tactical Doctrine, so should be chewing through heavy armour with ease, and the bolter discipline is very important with them, as you could have a Sternguard veteran squad sitting in cover and still blazing away with 2 shots each from 30 inches away. Finally, they can also combat squad, so if you bring a full 10-man unit, you can break them into 2 smaller units at the start of the battle. So overall, the Sternguard veterans are sort of like an upgraded tactical squad, with a whole host of buffs to their damage output, extra range and AP on their bolt guns, extra attacks in the close combat phase, and far more flexibility with their equipment. You could field them in a few different ways, either a backfield fire support squad, or either coming in from reserve or hiding inside a transport vehicle, ready to get close to blaze away with some other special war gear. So let's take a quick look at some of the ways that we can stack additional buffs on them and get more out of them on the battlefield. So let's talk about chapter traits first. Ultramarines are a very good pick for these guys, as they'll be able to bolter discipline on the move, and Ultramarines want to be in Tactical Doctrine, so they'll typically be always putting out 2 Strength 4 AP-3 shots even if they move. Being able to fall back and shoot is also quite a nice benefit, and I could certainly see these guys potentially being part of an advancing Ultramarines gun line, though I would be a little bit concerned about their fragility compared with some of the other Primaris units. White Scars I think could be interesting to put some Sternguard in a transport vehicle, with their stratagem to have a vehicle act like an impulsor so the vehicle can move, the squad can jump out and fire its weapons. It could make the Sternguard a lot more easy to deploy, a long way up the board out of a Rhino. This could certainly be a powerful way of getting a lot of combi weapons in range, or even just blazing away with storm bolters at close range. They're also not so terrible in assault themselves. They certainly have a decent number of attacks, and if there are any enemy shooting units that aren't going to pose that much of a threat for them, they could certainly beat them up with a whole load of strength 4 attacks in close combat after they've delivered their shooting payload. Iron Hands certainly don't hurt at all for their extra durability and their boosted overwatch, and they make taking heavy weapons that bit more viable in Sternguard squads. Raven Guard are an interesting choice for Sternguard. Getting -1 to hit while they're in cover is certainly a big boost for a backfield Sternguard squad, and their stratagem to put a unit in reserve and bring them on 9 inches away could get all of those nasty combi weapons right up in the face of the enemy without even having to buy a drop pod. So good synergy with the Sternguard vets on 2 accounts there. Salamanders is certainly a strong pick for a combi flamer style Sternguard squad, and is possibly the best unit to reliably make use of their max out flamer shot stratagem being able to deploy from drop pod, and if you take them as a successor with the extra range, then they can toast some heretics and Xenos with ease. If you are taking Salamanders, it's a bit more worth it to throw in a high strength heavy or special weapon to make some good use of their single reroll per unit. Imperial and Crimson Fists are both also excellent choices for Sternguard. Being bolter-wielding Marines, they'll get extra hits on 6s, which is a 25% damage increase when you're firing at a target. Ignores cover certainly isn't a bad bonus, nor is the +1 ballistic skill against hordes, and it could certainly be worth including a heavy bolter or two as heavy weapons, as Imperial Fists like to have heavy bolters wherever they can get them. In terms of character support, as a strong shooting unit, Sternguard will certainly profit a lot from Chapter Master, Captain and Lieutenant rerolls. They can get into quite a big points intensive unit, so might well be worth throwing a Chaplain buff on them as well, if you can get them into position and if they're not just coming on from deep strike. If you are running Sternguard as part of a backline, a Company Ancient nearby certainly wouldn't be a terrible idea, as being able to blaze away with a few special issue ammunition shots in your opponent's turn could do some key damage. In terms of stratagems, Sternguard have one of their own. Masterful Marksmanship costs 1 command point, and you use it whenever your squad either shoots or fires Overwatch, and it's just a flat +1 to wound for all attacks made by special issue bolt guns. Obviously this is going to have the most impact if you've taken a full 10-man squad, all with special issue bolt guns, and it really does ramp up the potential damage output. They'll be wounding even toughness 8 vehicles on 5s and 6s, and when they have decent AP, you'll certainly get a few wounds through. I'd say that this is best when you're firing against their intended target though, elite infantry, say other Space Marines, as wounding Space Marines on 3s with AP -3 potentially is very good indeed. There are a few other decent stratagems that work well with them. Auspex scan is certainly always worth considering if an enemy comes down from reserve nearby a heavy shooting unit. Steady advance could let them rapid fire even on the move if you did absolutely need to move them and have maximum bolter shots, though I'd probably try and avoid using this unless you really have to. And Transhuman Physiology, for 2 command points, will only let your opponent wound them on a maximum of a 4+, so could maybe allow the squad to survive in a pinch, or at least soak up a lot of enemy firepower. With the Sternguard's profile though, I feel like even with this, if your opponent really wants them dead, then this is unlikely to save them, but a couple of command points might be worth the extra shooting that your opponent has to dedicate towards them, rather than shooting something else in your army. So how would I personally run a Sternguard veteran squad on the battlefield? I honestly think that Sternguard are one of the units that doesn't necessarily compare incredibly well to some of the other options in the main codex, but when you combine them with certain stratagems and tactics that are available in the supplement books, they can find their niche. My single favourite use for Sternguard is the Salamander's Successor drop pod that drops down and hits the enemy with 60 auto-hitting flamer hits that are all +1 to wound, -1 AP, and then you've got a whole host of bolter shots on top of that. You can even throw on their stratagem for an extra +1 to wound, so those flamers are going to be wounding knights on a 4-up, and likely any infantry on a 2-up. That will set you back 3 CP for that combo, but it will certainly put a hefty amount of damage on anything in the game. You could certainly combo a drop pod worth of Sternguard with combi weapons, with a lot of different unique chapter strategies as well. Anywhere that can give them +1 to hit or +1 to wound means that you could be hitting the enemy where it hurts with a very large punch. If I was to field a backfield Sternguard squad, I'd likely want to be making heavy use of the special issue bolt guns. I would probably just be fielding them bare bones 14-point models with the special issue bolt guns, and giving the sergeant an additional storm bolter. That way, for 72 points, you'd have a squad throwing out 10 special issue ammunition shots at 30-inch range, and an additional 4 shots from the sergeant. Very hitty indeed, and if the enemy does get close, they pack a bit of a harder punch than tactical marines. I think that in this format they work a bit better as small squads, as you get the extra sergeants, and you don't really lose out on any of the options. I could potentially see someone running a full 10-man squad with special issue ammunition bolters though, just to get the most out of that stratagem, as special issue bolters, plus 1 command point for +1 to wounds, could be a very nice combo. If you were feeling pretty lavish, then you could also throw in a chaplain for an additional +1 to wound, so you'd be wounding anything in the game on at least 4+, and most infantry on a 2+. In terms of on-battlefield tactics, if you're using a drop pod Sternguard squad, the main tactic is going to be to try and clear a drop zone next to your intended targets, and bring them on at the key time. You need to decide when to commit the punch, whether it's turn 1 to clear a bunch of screening infantry units, or if you think that it's worth holding them back till turn 2 or turn 3 so you can eliminate the screens so they can drop down to deal the enemy a knockout blow. Obviously the ideal is to drop them down as early as possible, because if you don't kill the enemy's units then they're going to have an extra turn or two to marauder around and blow up your army. So you need to weigh up whether or not you can get them to their ideal targets versus the cost of delaying. I believe that the drop pod will protect them from intercepting stratagems such as Auspex scan, as the Auspex scan would have to target the drop pod first when it came on, and not the disembarking Sternguard squad, which is a positive. I'd certainly try and get them out in cover if you possibly can, and I'd also certainly be considering whether or not it's worth charging after you've shot. The Sternguards might well get wiped out next turn, so if there is a cheap enemy infantry unit that you can put some damage on, without taking too much damage in return from the Sternguard, then it could be worth attempting the charge and dealing out a bunch of damage in close combat as well. If you could drop them down and deploy them in a way that they're screened from the shooting of most of the rest of the enemy army, then that would also be a big positive, as the Sternguard are a very fragile unit, and anything that you can do to increase their survivability would be good. If you're starting them on the board, I'd certainly think about trying to hide them in the bottom floor of ruins out of line of sight if you have second turn. You could then move forward and guarantee that they're going to get at least some bolt of fire off, because if you deploy them in the open, they might well just be gunned off the tabletop before achieving anything. You'd certainly want to consider putting them in any auras for characters to increase the maximum damage potential, and for the rest of the game, hug cover, get that 2-up save, and blaze away at decent range with those nice special issue ammunition shots. And as always, with decent Space Marine melee, you can consider countercharging if the enemy gets too close, but weigh up the cost of that versus the potential lost shooting next turn, if they're not about to get charged anyway. I think the Sternguard veterans are some of the best users of transports such as rhinos, as they aren't that durable, but pack a big punch. You can add a lot to their value by giving them a metal box to hide in until they can get out to deliver their damage. As we said before, this works particularly well if you're White Scars, due to being able to get out after movement via a stratagem. So overall, the Sternguard veterans do pack a decent punch for their value, but compared with a lot of the Space Marines' arsenal, they are quite fragile. I'd certainly be considering the various other options when you have the chance to take Sternguard veterans. They do other things that other Marines can't quite do, but several of their battlefield roles can be covered by other units quite well. Firstly, if you're using Sternguard as backfield support units, the various Space Marine troops choices are quite appealing as alternatives due to the fact that they fill up battalions and get you command points. The Sternguard are certainly more dangerous than tactical Marines, but you do have to think, is this costing you a few more command points by not fielding another battalion of Marines? And as we all know, command points access a lot of fun stuff. In particular, intercessors have longer ranged, higher AOP bolt guns, and for just a few extra points than the Sternguard, they get an additional wound per model, so they're a lot more durable. You have to weigh up whether 3 points and an additional pip of AP is worth it to trade out for the intercessor's extra wound. In terms of the Storm Bolter loadout for the Sternguard, I actually quite like the company veterans that can take a Storm Shield and a Storm Bolter. They might serve you better, and you can put multiple units of them in a drop pod if you still want that big 10-man punch. Finally, in terms of Sternguard dropping in drop pods, you'd want to consider the various other options for reserving Space Marines. Terminators can drop down and blaze away with Storm Bolters at decent range, as well as being a bit tankier and having a massive melee threat. Raven Guard can put all manner of nasties in Deep Strike Reserve, so you might be better off with Aggressors or Assault Centurions in their case. And in terms of heavy hitting damage dealing units coming in from Reserve, putting a drop pod full of Grav Devastators on the table and using their Graphitic Amplification stratagem will again quite possibly yield you more damage on a heavy target than a full unit of Sternguard with combi weapons. As expected in the Space Marine Codex, with so many units toting bolt guns, the Sternguard certainly have stiff competition for their battlefield role. That's why I think that they're best used as part of a very specific tactic, such as a Salamander's Flamer or Melter Bomb. Overall though, they're definitely much improved compared with how they came out at the start of 8th edition, and so far in 8th there's certainly never been a better time to put Sternguard on the table. If you have any other tactics or strategies with Sternguard and you'd like to let us know, then please post them down in the comments. I think they're a really fun little unit, and I really like the amount of flexibility they have. Thanks for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to hear more like this. I'll hope to see you guys next time.